St. Louis Blues, the 2019 Stanley Cup champions, are one of the most beloved hockey teams in America today. Of course, when they started, they were not very good, but now after their Stanley Cup successes, they are scary good. Today, I'm starting a brand new series on Let's Talk Sports, talking about some sports teams and how they started. Basically, we'll be taking a look at the Blues in today's video, talking about how they started, their history, successes, and failures that the team has had over the years, and some great people that have decided to dedicate themselves to St. Louis hockey. Sit back, relax, grab a snack, maybe something to drink, or maybe even take a nap. As I, Josh Wright, may proudly present to you on Let's Talk Sports, a look back of the St. Louis Blues. So our story begins in the year 1967 when the NHL added 6 new expansion teams to the league, being the Minnesota North Stars, Los Angeles Kings, Philadelphia Flyers, Pittsburgh Penguins, California Seals, and of course, the topic of today's video, the St. Louis Blues. Chicago Blackhawks owner James D. Norris and Arthur Witz had also owned an arena, in St. Louis. They sought to unload the arena, which wasn't very maintained since the 1940s. Thus, the NHL gave St. Louis a hockey team in the expansion bid. NHL President Clarence Campbell mentioned that during the expansion meeting, "We want St. Louis to have a team because of the geographical location and its adequate building." Well, I don't know if that's what he sounded like, but oh well. The Blues' first owners were Sid Solomon Jr., Sid Solomon III, well, you get it, the Solomons, and Robert L. Wolfson, who were granted the team in 1966. St. Louis Cardinals legend Stan Musial and his business partner Julius Biggie Garagini were also members of a 16-man investment group, making an initial formal application for the franchise. Unfortunately for Biggie, he passed away of a heart attack on June 19, 1967, so he would never see the Blues on ice. The St. Louis Blues played their first ever regular season game on October 11, 1967 versus the Minnesota North Stars, but they finished in a tie. Their first win and loss both came against the Pittsburgh Penguins, losing 3-1 and then won 4-2. Their first head coach was Len Patrick and then Scotty Bowman. Len Patrick also served as the general manager, but after a really bad November, stepped down as head coach. The Blues finished 27-31-16, making the NHL playoffs, taking on the Philadelphia Flyers, beating them in a 7-game series. They would move on to the Stanley Cup after taking down the Minnesota North Stars and then got swept by the Montreal Canadiens in 1968. The following year, well, you guys get what happened. The Blues went back to the Stanley Cup and got swept by, yep, you guessed it, Montreal Canadiens. The first 2 teams included players such as Doug Harvey, Don McKinney, and Dickie Moore. Let's not forget Glenn Hall and Jacques Plant, whatever. If I pronounce these names wrong, I apologize. I'm not much of a hockey person. But anyway, back to the Blues. The Blues won the Vezina Trophy in 1969 with the defense led by defensive forward Jim Roberts, Al Arbour, who was the team captain at the time, the Plager brothers, and Phil Goyette, who won the Lady Byng Trophy in 1970. Entering the 1970s, the Blues lost the Stanley Cup again to the Boston Bruins. Though they made their Stanley Cup 3 straight years in a row, those successes would later on change. They hired Al Arbour to be the next head coach of the Blues. To give them a little competition, the Chicago Blackhawks made the switch over to the Western Division, and Bowman left to join the Montreal Canadiens. Hall, Plant, and Goyette and Berenson were all lost in retirement or trade. But not everything went bad. They still were able to bring in Gary Unger from the Detroit Red Wings, who scored 30 or more goals in 8 consecutive seasons in a row. Fast forward to the 1976-77 season, the Western Division was very weak, with the Blues finishing 5 games below 500, losing to the Canadiens. This would be the last playoff appearance for the team in over a decade. Around this time, the team was going through a financial collapse, partly due to the World Hockey Association. However, most of it had to be done with the Solomons first when they got their hands on the franchise back in '67. Deferred contracts came due just as the Blues' performance on the ice began to slip a little bit. The Solomons at one point had to cut down the team's staff down to just 3 employees. Emile Francis ended up being one of those employees. He ended up serving as the team's president, general manager, and head coach. In hopes of saving the Blues, Francis wanted Ralston Purina, who, if for those of you who don't know, is an animal feed or pet food company. Yeah, a dog food company, to buy the Blues, the arena, and $8.8 million debt. Between 1978 and 1980, the team was not very good. Entering the 1980-81 season, the Blues had a much better season with a 48-18-17 record, making the playoffs for the first time since, well, the 1977-78 season. They defeated the Pittsburgh Penguins in the first round, winning Game 5 in an overtime 4-3, and then got knocked out against the New York Rangers in the following series. During this season, the Blues scored a total of 107 goals in the 1980-81 year, which was the best season, or the second best in the NHL. 10 players on the Blues ended up scoring 20 or more goals, including future Hall of Famer Bernie Federko, Wayne Babiak, Blake Dunlop, Joaquin Patterson, Brian Sutter, Mike Zook, Perry Turnbull, Tony Curry, Blair Chapman, and Larry Patty. Again, if I'm pronouncing these names wrong, I completely apologize. I know this is very boring, me talking in the background while you're staring at a Blues logo. Guys, I promise this will get better. The 1981-82 season, the Blues were back in the playoffs, defeating the Winnipeg Jets, losing to the Chicago Blackhawks. While the Blues on the ice were having excellent performances, but off the ice, there were some more drama going on. Ralston Purina ended up losing an estimated $1.8 million during its 6-year ownership with the Blues. Hal Dean, who was the chairman for the pet food company, retired. His successor, William Sturris, wanted to focus more on dog food than kick-ass hockey. Seriously? I understand. Sturris saw the team as a money-bleeding division and put the Blues on the market. Oh, come on. There were quite a bit of parties interested, and none of them had enough of what Ralston was asking for. In January of 1983, Batoni Hunter Enterprises Ltd., led by WHA and Bill Hunter, the founder of the Edmonton Oilers, actually tendered an offer to buy the St. Louis Blues. He intended on building a brand new 18,000-seat arena that would cost $43 million to build in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan for the 1983-84 season, leaving both fans and players stunned. December 7th, 1982 was the first time that year the Blues played the Oilers. I know this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I wanted to put it in anyway, so losing 3-2. The two teams met again 2 more times after that, with the Oilers winning all of them. The Blues went on to go 25-40-15, making the playoffs somehow, losing to the Chicago Blackhawks. During the offseason, more changes were made to the team. First, Ralston made a deal with Hunter, renaming his company Coliseum Holdings Ltd. for $12 million on April 21st. Second, less than a couple of weeks later, Emile Francis left the team to become a president and general manager of the Hartford Whalers. And third, the Blues fired 60% of their employees. The remaining of the team employees were the accounting department, scouting staff, and coach Barclay Plager. 75% of the NHL Board of Governors for the sale and transfer of the club. The NHL Board of Governors, however, rejected the deal by a vote of 15-3, feeling that Saskatoon, Saskatchewan was a little too small and financially stable to support an NHL team. Ralston would file a $60 million antitrust lawsuit in the U.S. District Court against the NHL. They claimed that the league broke federal antitrust laws, breaching the duty of good faith and fair dealing by rejecting the sale and transfer of the Blues to Hunter's group. On June 3rd, 1983, Ralston announced that he still had no interest in owning the team. I mean, come on. And there are starving dogs and cats everywhere. I think they'd probably be more worried on starving cats and dogs than, a hockey team. Anyway, since the pet food company wasn't interested, they didn't enter the 1983 NHL entry draft. So the Blues had to pretty much forfeit all their draft picks. Sucks, I know. While searching for a new owner, John Ziegler, the league president, said they would try to keep the Blues in St. Louis. 10 days before the deadline, the NHL had approved a bid from a businessman named Harry Ornest, and a bunch of other St. Louis investors for the team and the arena. Harry Ornest actually had plans to buy the team in around March, but built his efforts around late June. That was when he had enough money. To this date, the closest an NHL team had come to a folding was the Cleveland Barons, who merged into the Minnesota North Stars after 1977-78. When Harry Ornest took over as the owner, he ran the team very cheaply, but the players didn't care. According to team captain Brian Sutter, they wanted to remain in St. Louis because it reminded them of rural areas in the Canadian towns that most of the players grew up in. The Blues started the season off hosting the Pittsburgh Penguins, winning 5-3. From October 8th to October 19th, the Blues had a winning streak going on until they lost to the Detroit Red Wings. Then, on October 25th, the Blues were starting a cold streak, losing 12 of their next 18 games. However, the Blues managed to finish second in the division and made the playoffs, beating the Red Wings and losing to the North Stars. Okay, so now let's get into some really great players on the Blues. And fast forward to 1988, talking about Brett Hull. Now, in March of 1988, the Blues made a trade with the Calgary Flames, acquiring Brett Hull, sending Steve Bobzik, Rob Ramage, and Rick Walmsley to the Flames. The Blues were still chugging along through the late 80s and early 90s. At this time, Ron Caron took over as the general manager for the Blues and made a lot of crazy moves, bringing in forwards such as Adam Oates, Brendan Shanahan, and of course, Brett Hull. Defensive men Al Malknis and goaltender Curtis Joseph and many other players were also involved. The Blues made the playoffs in 1988, defeating the Chicago Blackhawks and losing to the Detroit Red Wings. Brett Hull's first full season with the Blues in 1988 and 89, he played in 78 games, had a 0.53 goals per game rate, whatever that is, 34 goals and 35 assists. The Blues that season went 33, 35, and 12, beating the North Stars and once again losing to the Red Wings. This seemed to be a problem for the Blues, but they still were a great team, but never could make it past the second round of the NHL playoffs. Anyways, back to Brett Hull, who was given the nickname Golden Brett, which was a reference to his dad, Bobby Hull, who had an amazing career, mainly with the Blackhawks and Winnipeg Jets, and was given the nickname Golden Jet. Going into the 1990-1991 season, he was one of the top stars in the NHL, netting a total of 86 goals, earning him the Hart Memorial Trophy and an MVP. 1994, the Blues hired new head coach Mike Keenan with the hope that he could get the Blues and help the Blues with their problem of losing in the second round of the playoffs and get them to a Stanley Cup. When Mike Keenan took over, he made some major changes to the team. In 1995-1996, Curtis Joseph and Brendan Shanahan who were fan favorites in St. Louis, and acquired a 35-year-old Wayne Gretzky. Curtis Joseph and Brendan Shanahan were traded. And then Wayne Gretzky, who was 35 years old at the time, and was acquired. And Wayne, he ended up playing a lot of for many years for the Edmonton Oilers and Los Angeles Kings, alongside goaltender Grant Furr. Wayne Gretzky would become a free agent at the end of the year. The Blues tried to give him an offer, but he declined it and went on to spend the last 3 years of his career with the New York Rangers. During 1995 and 1996, the Blues still had the same problem with the playoffs. First round, they beat the Toronto Maple Leafs and then go on to the second round, and guess what happened? They lost to the Detroit Red Wings. December 19th, 1996, Mike Keenan was fired and hired Jimmy Roberts. That rhymes, fired, hired. Ron Caron and reinstated as general manager, and on June 9th, 1997, my mom's 15th birthday, I think, hired Larry Plew. Keenan and left for the Dallas Stars in 1998 and won a Stanley Cup with the Stars, taking team captain Brett Hull with him. When the 1990s came to an end, the Blues were the only NHL team that made the playoffs throughout the entire decade. But guess what happened? They never made it to the Stanley Cup. Entering the 2000s. Well, before we get into the 2000s, we'll go to 1995, where defensive men from the Hartford Whalers was acquired. I don't know. I guess I forgot to put that in. Oh, well. The Blues also got their hands on guys like Keith Tkachuk, whatever. Some guy named Keith, Pavel Demitra, Pierre Turgeon, Al Malkinus, I guess, was in here again, and goaltender Roman Turek, which helped keep the Blues contenders in the NHL. Making in the playoffs in 1999-2000, they were still stunned. And as they were eliminated by the San Jose Sharks, the Sharks of all teams, in the first round of the playoffs. The following year, the Blues met the Sharks again in the playoffs. This time, it was the Blues that would win. The second round, they got their revenge on Brett Hull and the Dallas Stars, which meant they finally made it past the second round, ladies and gentlemen. And then they would be hosted by the Colorado Avalanche, and then they lost. Besides their elimination in 2001, the Blues still kept on being competitive, with the new head coach Joel Quenneville in charge. Between 1980 and 2004, the Blues made the NHL playoffs every single year, being the third longest playoff streak in North American sports. But the thing is that they never made it to the Stanley Cup, and they only made it to the conference finals twice, being in 1986 and 2001. Since there was no 2004-2005 season, I don't know why, we'll skip over to 2005 and 2006. The Blues had a 21-46-15 record, which was the worst in the team's history, and failed to make the playoffs for the fourth time in their entire existence. To make things even worse was that the St. Louis fans that once loved and supported the Blues no matter what happened started to fade away from the team, with crowds normally coming in around 18,000 and 19,000 slimming down to 12,000. Back in 1999, Nancy Walton Laurie, who was a Walmart hare, and her husband Bill had purchased the Blues. 7 years later, in 2005, the couple announced that they wanted to sell the team. Bill Laurie was actually a former basketball player at Memphis State University and always wanted to move an NBA team to St. Louis. I know this has nothing to do with the Blues, but you know what? He was part of the Blues ownership, so ha! I don't know what ha means, but oh well. We'll figure it out together, shall we? Anyway, so Bill here, he wanted to move an NBA team to St. Louis, which he almost did to the Vancouver Grizzlies, but that was a big failure. In 2001, the Grizzlies settled in Memphis. Besides St. Louis, this is more of a baseball and hockey city than it is a basketball city, in my opinion. Anyway, before the 2005-2006 season, the Lauries announced that they would sell the Blues to SCP Worldwide, also consulting investments to Dave Checketts, who used to be president of Madison Square Garden, home of the New York Knicks. November 14, 2005, it was announced that SCP Worldwide withdrew negotiations to buy the team. After a horrible 2005-2006 season, the Blues had the worst record in the NHL. The Blues' new management started to focus on rebuilding in the hockey squad. Former Blue John Davidson as president of hockey operations, moving Pliuto, whatever that means, to more advisory role. Davidson made a bunch of blockbuster moves, such as picking up Jay McKee, Bill Guerin, and Manny Legase from the free agent market. Doug Waite was also brought into the Blues from the Carolina Hurricanes. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be in St. Louis for a long time because he got traded to the Anaheim Ducks in December of 2007 for minor league hockey player Andy McDonald. Yes, there are minor league teams in hockey. I'm surprised too. For the first half of the season, fan and support was still being very sluggish. Between November 25th versus the Phoenix Coyotes and December 17th versus the Nashville Predators, the Blues had an 11-game losing streak. The streak came to an end, though, on December 19th in a 4-1 win over the Penguins. Mike Kitchen was head coach of the Blues at the time, and he ended up getting fired and was replaced by Andy Murray. Before the trade deadline in 2007, the Blues traded away Bill Guerin, Keith, and Dennis Weidman for draft picks. They picked up Brad Boyes from the Boston Bruins, sending Weidman over to Boston. During 2007 and 2008, Boyes became the fastest Blues player since Brett Hull to score 40 or more goals. Also, in 2007 and during the offseason, Paul Carrier, I'm just going to call him Paul because that's his first name, Paul. Anyway, Paul signed a 3-year, $18 million deal with the Blues. Barrett Jackman, a defensive man, re-signed to a 1-year deal. And team captain Dallas Drake left for the Detroit Red Wings. Cal Soderberg was traded to the Bruins for Hannu Toivonen. The 2008 Blues also included rookie players such as David Perrin, Steven Wagner, and Eric Johnson. Finally, names I can pronounce. Oh yeah, it was the first year Louis Bear was introduced as the team mascot. After missing the playoffs again in 2008, I think, the Blues made the playoffs in 2008 and 2009, playing the Vancouver Canucks, losing in a 4-game sweep, with the last game being a 3-2 overtime loss. In January of 2010, Andy Murray was fired and after going 17-17 and 6, sitting in dead last in the Western Conference. The Blues brought in Davis Payne as the new head coach, who was named the 23rd head coach of the St. Louis hockey team ever, and was previously the head coach of a Blues minor league team, the Peoria Rivermen, who lived not too far away from me. Anyway, so this is when things start to get really juicy, ladies and gentlemen. This is when we enter the 2010s. Of course, the Blues won on a Stanley Cup. This is the start of the rebuild, the Stanley Cup rebuild, starting in 2011, ladies and gentlemen. So it starts in March of 2011. The Blues were for sale again. They also made some big splashes on the free agent market, signing Brian Elliott, Scott Nickel, Kent Huskins, Jason Arnott, and Jamie Langenbrunner. Davis Payne was fired and was replaced by Ken Hitchcock, with David Beckus as the new team captain. Hitchcock. Sorry, we're getting distracted. The following season in 2012, the Blues made the playoffs, beating the San Jose Sharks in the first round, and in the second round got eliminated by the LA Kings, who would also knock them out of the playoffs the following year. In 2013-2014, the Blues scored 100-plus goals for the sixth time in franchise history, also having 52 wins, but lost the first round to the Chicago Blackhawks. 2014-2015, the Blues won the Central Division, again losing to the first round to the Minnesota Wild. The following year, the Blues made the playoffs again and had a much better run. They got their revenge on the Blackhawks, beating them in a 7-game series. Round 2 against the Dallas Stars. The first 2 games of the series was split in Dallas, and the next 2 split in St. Louis. The Blues won the next 2 out of 3 games, moving on to the conference finals against the San Jose Sharks. The first 2 games, St. Louis won a game, Sharks won a game. And then the series was tied at 2 games apiece. The Sharks came back and won versus the Blues, moving on to the Stanley Cup. The new team captain and Alex Pietrangelo, forgot to bring that up, sorry. June 13th, 2016, Mike Yeo would also replace Ken Hitchcock as the new head coach for the 2016-17 season. David Becks left the team also to join the Bruins. Brian Elliott was traded to the Calgary Flames for Troy Bauer, and was also assigned free agent Steve Ott. Jake Allen was also given the starting role for a goaltender, picking up backup from the Nashville Predators, Carter Hutton. Oh, let's not forget forward David Perrin. The Blues lost the second round to the Predators. Wait, did I just bring... David Perrin, he was re-signed. I forgot to bring that up, sorry. David Perrin was re-signed. For those of you who get easily confused with everything. The Blues lost the second round to the Nashville Predators. In 2017-2018, David Perrin left for the brand new Vegas Golden Knights. They brought Braden Shen from the Philadelphia Flyers, giving away Jori Lehtera. In the first 31 games, the Blues were 21-8-2 to start off the year, but then there was some bad news for the Blues. Jay Bauermeister was hurt, and Jaden Schwartz missed a majority of the season. Paul Stastny went to the Winnipeg Jets during the trade deadline, and after a loss to the Colorado Avalanche in the last game of the season, it caused the Blues to not go to the playoffs. All right, after all that gibberish we have finally got to the part where everybody's been waiting for. The year the Blues won the Stanley Cup. Ryan O'Reilly, one of my favorite players, came over from the Buffalo Sabres. Tyler Pozick, Pat Maroon, and Chad Johnson also joined in on the fun. November, Mike Yeo was fired, and Craig Berube, I think that's how you say his name, I'm just going to call him Craig for now, was the new replacement. The Blues finished 45-28-9, playing the first round versus the Winnipeg Jets. The Blues won the first 2 games in Winnipeg. When the series moved to St. Louis, the Jets won the next 2 games, Game 4 being in overtime. Game 6 went back to Winnipeg. The Blues won 3-2, winning in Game 7 as well. Round 2 versus the Dallas Stars, who were battling the Blues all year long, became one of the team's biggest rivals. St. Louis, that's where the first 2 games were at in St. Louis, was split at a game apiece. The Stars were up 3-2 with the Game 6 going to Dallas. The Blues came back and won the last 2 games. The conference finals versus the San Jose Sharks, the Blues were down 2-1 in the series. Game 4 in St. Louis, the Blues tied the series in a 2-1 win and won the next 2, moving on to the 2019 Stanley Cup versus the Boston Bruins. You know how in baseball people say you can't count out the Cardinals? Well, in this situation, you can't count out the Blues, I guess. The first 2 games in Boston, the Bruins won a game, and then the Blues won a game. Series moves to St. Louis, and once again, Blues win a game, Bruins win a game. This was the team knew they had to be very serious about the next few games. And sure enough, Game 7 in Boston, the Blues won 4-1, winning the entire thing. This was a special moment in the hockey world. The St. Louis Blues, for the first time in franchise history, won the Stanley Cup. Everybody was giving each other high fives, pat on the backs, hugs, and it was just a great moment and a great time for the city of St. Louis to win the Stanley Cup. Around this time, the MLB Cardinals also made the 2019 playoffs for their first time since 2015, beating the Braves in the division series and losing the NLCS to the Nationals. Yeah, the Nationals of all teams. But that's another video. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new here. I know this was probably very boring, me talking on and on about the St. Louis Blues with the St. Louis Blues logo behind me. And I apologize if I said any names incorrectly. Again, I'm not a hockey fan. But the next video similar to this, I want to make this into a new series. How about next time we'll have the series take place in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. Till then, see you later, guys.